Hello, everyone. Tennis Weekly podcast here, and big breaking news from the world of tennis. Five-time Grand Slam winner Iga Swiatek has been suspended after testing positive for a prohibited substance. She is serving that suspension at the moment, a 1 month suspension, and this was announced by the International Tennis Integrity Agency on Thursday. Chris, you are here. We're going to be talking about this, getting immediate reactions, what this means for Iga Swiatek. How does this compare to other high-profile cases that have happened, including Jannik Sinner? But let's just kind of go through the facts as reported, first of all. As I say, Swiatek, five-time Grand Slam winner. She has tested positive for the prohibited substance. I'm going to try and say it correctly. Trimetazidine. Is that right? Am I saying that right?
Not quite right. I mean,
Okay.
you're almost
They
there.
always have these really
Trimetazidine.
trimetazidine. There we go. They always have these really finicky names. But right, trimetazidine.
TMZ, we can refer it to as, or
Okay,
TMZ.
TMZ. The ITIA have found Swiatek's level of fault was considered to be at the lowest end of the range for no significant fault or negligence. Having said that, she did produce a positive test with this substance, and it came from a regulated non-prescription medication, melatonin. Yes, this again, the end of the season just keeps giving, and I think high profile cases of tests of positive results is a theme of this season.
Mm.
Jannik Sinner first on the men's side, Iga Swiatek now on the WTA side. First of all, just what were your immediate reactions when this happened?
Well, my immediate reaction was obviously shocked because it's very off brand for Ego, and she makes that clear in her statement. But I do think it was a very strange absence she had from the tour
Yeah.
during the Asian swing. It didn't necessarily make sense. We tried to think about maybe it was due to changes in her team, as she did say that's why she missed the Wuhan event. That's the official line that she gave the tournament to communicate. But from my perspective, knowing how focused Iga is on records, on the number one ranking, it did feel like this made sense that she wasn't able to compete. Otherwise, she would not surrender that world number one ranking to Sabalenka.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think a lot of people are in the same boat of like, hang on, she's such a high profile player. She's so, you know, in a fierce battle really with Sabalenka in terms of the rankings. It felt like a bit of an odd situation to be in terms of these high profile tournaments and not her being there. And
Mm.
certainly this goes quite a far way in explaining what has happened.
Mm.
I mean, just from your perspective, you've been reading into this.
Yes.
What is the situation? Because I've just kind of read the news story in terms of, as I say, like it's a 1 month suspension.
Hmm.
She is still serving it at the moment. I think we're
Yes.
coming towards the end of it. But in terms of those details, what has actually gone on here?
Yes. So, firstly, I'll make it very clear that when they have done all the testing and on the contamination side of things, they have found that the product that she was taking was contaminated. So, we, on not even on the balance of things, we can say with certainty that she was not seeking to dope, and she did not. Well, it was genuine contamination because we have lab results that confirm that. In terms of the timeline, this was something that was notified to her when an out of competition test on the 12th of August came back with TMZ inside it. And also, she was then notified a month later. So you get notified to say this is coming up. She denied the charge and she requested that the B sample was tested, and that was on the 14th of September. And then the lab came back 5 days later to confirm it was the case. So then she signed a petition so she could get the provisional sanction lifted because she was suspended from competition. And then that was not granted. And she did not know the source. And that was the reason why it wasn't granted. 1 day later, she confirmed what the source was. That went to lab testing. And that's where it was confirmed that it was contamination. And then as a result, she was allowed to compete again at the WTA finals and the Billie Jean King Cup finals. So now this is the final ruling that has happened. And that's what we're still sort of waiting for in the Jannik Sinner case, is when you can be temporarily or kind of partially suspended from competition. And then you have this period where a verdict is then given. And then she was notified that the verdict was a 1 month ban.
I mean, just hearing the timeline, the provisional suspension happened from 22nd of September until 4th of October. It's being served at the moment. The ITA offered Swiatek a suspension on the 27th of November, which she accepted. But it feels like it's a lot quicker than some of the stories from players we've heard from in the past. I'm particularly thinking about the British player, Tara Moore, who it feels like is still going through like the whole situation. Is this just gonna kind of, I say, for some people, is this gonna just again add to that
Hmm.
argument of top players, high profile players get a different path, a different treatment than say lower ranked players?
I think there's a big argument for that. I think especially with the Jannik Sinner case,
Mm,
in terms of the Tara Moore case where it was contaminated meat. I think what was lucky in this sense for Iga was that she did still have that batch of product that could be tested, that could exonerate her
mm,
from the fact that this was seen as being of fault. It was no significant fault. And the fact that that is able to be tested is a luxury. Medvedev's talked about that, saying it's actually a lot easier if you know what's contaminated you. But the whole point of contamination is that you didn't know that was happening. Otherwise, you would bear fault. So that's where the meat is actually unable to be tested because you don't have that piece of meat still. It doesn't really make sense in that way. So that's why those processes can take a lot
mm,
longer. I think when it comes to the more natural comparison, which is the Jannik Sinner situation, where two world number ones, former world number one and Iga Swiatek, have both tested positive. Iga actually, the delay and the fact that her suspension wasn't lifted sooner was because they had to go to lab testing to prove this
mm.
was a contaminated substance that she took. Whereas Jannik Sinner was able to explain it away in just 1 day, and he did that twice. So he never missed any active competition and was never suspended from active competition. And that's where I think it gets quite hazy because Iga has proved her innocence in terms of the contamination because the WADA lab results have confirmed that. But having said that, Jannik Sinner, it's almost he said, she said, what's the story, what's the narrative? So, in terms of the explanation, it almost feels like if you're going to give one and you do have access to the best resources in the world, Jannik Sinner's was almost the perfect explain away of the problem.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny because with Sinner and Swiatek, there are no doubt going to be all these, I guess, all these kind of comparisons given they're so high profile. Why do you think it is that this season it feels like, as I say, it's been a season where we've got ourselves into it's not just been an exception or an outlier. We've now had two very high
Mm.
profile cases, Simona Halep as well more recently. Why do you think this season we've seen these situations happen? Whereas I feel like over the last, decade or so, I mean, we have had high profile kind of players, in these situations, but two in one season. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I mean, that's a very big question. I think when it comes to sport in general, I think there's a lot going on right now in terms of gaining a professional advantage as well as be able to do it in a way
Mm,
that goes undetected. And I think there are lots of different ways you can try and do that. Having said that, I don't think that the Iga case is necessarily that at all. I've said that very clearly that I think that it is due to genuine contamination because that's what the lab results say. But I do think it is a testament to the fact that sport is not clean, tennis is not clean, and we would be naive to think that it is. Um, these are examples which are very surprising given how high profile they are, and I do think that that is why I'm particularly lacking empathy when it comes to the victim playing that happens to both of these two, because ultimately you are able to batch test and these situations can be avoided. The Yannick Sinner situation, to say he bought no fault and his team bore no fault is genuinely
mm,
almost ridiculous in the sense that that was a product that his team purchased, which said, I mean, it says clearly on it that it's doping, says clearly that it's banned. That was still used and that was accepted, and there has been no consequences beyond prize money. And the fact that Iga has all of the resources at her disposal and chose to do something that wasn't batch tested, which is what the official recommendation is from the head of the ITIA, as well as when you have the onboarding, when it comes to the doping side of things, they make it very clear that if you take any supplement, you could be risking a 4-year
Mm.
ban because there are these risks that are attached to it. But it comes down to the marginal gains in tennis. And I think that's what it is. It's so competitive, it's so physical. It is marginal gains. And whether a supplement is a vitamin or whether it's a medical item in this sense, then I do think that is kind of why. It's because there is benefit to being as healthy as you can be and as physically as fit as you can be. And whichever way you go around that, you have to be very, very careful because anyone can get caught out, even if you have all the resources in the world behind you.
And yeah, it's such a tricky and complex matter. And it was interesting to hear kind of Taylor Fritz talk about it because he talked about the fact that regardless of what's happened, fans always use these kind of stories and these topics to kind of push a narrative. And if if you're a fan of one of their rivals,
Mm,
of course you're always going to be like, oh, Shiontek's done something bad. This is something bad. We should all, not like Shiontek because of it. And Fritz kind of called this out in terms of saying he really doesn't like these situations in the sense of the narratives that it enables, I think, kind of like fans and rival fans
mm.
potentially can push. I mean, where do you stand on that in terms of, as I say, the perception of Shiontek? And do you see this as something maybe like, as I say, fans of her rivals are gonna look at and promote and say, and sort of in favor of their in favor of their champion, like a maybe like a Sabalenka?
Well, I also imagine that Taylor Fritz probably has a problem with how, Denis Shapovalov and Nick
Mm,
Kyrgios communicate around these things because as soon as there's a positive test, immediately the wave is that they are a
yeah.
doper. And obviously, if you do have a positive test, technically that is doping, but performance enhancing, the Iga Swiatek situation was not. In terms of where I stand, I think I do think that when you do play the victim and say how tough this has been for you, it's something that could be avoided. And so I think I would much rather that these athletes came out and didn't try and spin the full narrative to be, I'm holier than thou. I've not done anything wrong. This happened to me. It's a tough time.
Mm.
I've been so upset by this. It's made me very anxious. And I think you just have to do what Sharapova did and say, look, I failed a test. This is why I'm going to take what is given to me that I think is fair. And if not, I'll appeal it. And I think with
Do you think
Iga,
that's in the PR playbook? Do you think
it
that's
is. I
coming
do think
from?
it is. It's the whole
Yeah.
narrative of not admitting fault or responsibility,
Mm.
or the fact that with doping, it is so nuanced in what actually happened and what the interpretation is, and the understanding is so low. So then you can play to the audience by saying, this has been so hard. I've been proven innocent. Simona Halep's done that as well. When there's still many, many question marks around that case, as well as the Jannik Sinner case. But in this case, I would have liked Iga to take responsibility for the fact that she didn't list it in terms of one of the 14 other supplements she listed in terms of the time of that test when she had the out of competition test. It was not on the list. She did not say that she was taking it. And also, she did not batch test it. And I think that would be something that I would like players to take responsibility for, because then I think it would actually mean that you don't have to be they're completely innocent or they're completely guilty. You can
Mm.
say she made a mistake and it was a mistake that was not her fault, but it could have been avoided. And I think that's a much easier way of talking about it than are they a doper or are they not a doper? Because then you get into very
Mm.
contentious issues and contentious subjects.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just finally, I mean, Shiontek said, I admit this situation hit me hard because all my life I strive to have a career that could be an example for generations to come. I have a sense this situation could undermine the image I've been building for years, which is why I hope you will understand I had no control over it and could do nothing to prevent this unfortunate turn of events. So, yeah, it does sound like, yeah, that is straight
No
out of maybe the
control, right? I mean,
say, yeah, I think it's I think in all these situations, I always think there's a job to do in terms of player education and it right even if I kind of take that and think yeah you might you say you're saying that but actually is it because you're not aware of actually there are other things you may be able to do to protect yourself from these situations because it does feel like they are happening more and more frequently. And I wouldn't be surprised, next season if we have another high profile player, in this situation. I think it's what's tough is that I just don't really know what to make of it in terms of like it's happening to it feels like it's happening to to everyone. It could happen to the world number one, it could happen to like the world number 272 or whatever. But I guess
Yeah.
a lot of people will say they just want a fair process that is the same for everyone.
And
And there maybe is an argument to say with Sinner, Swiatek that there's still kind of that disparity at play.
And I would agree with that. I think the process is very, very flawed. The transparency is very flawed. And I think when it comes down to Iga's statement, I think, saying that she had no control, that is where I take issue. And I also think that when it comes to these sorts of problems, you have to be very clear that you are an athlete. You are responsible for what you put in your body. Right now, I can tell you, I take 3 supplements, take 3 vitamins. That's it. I'm not a professional athlete, but if my whole life, my whole reputation was staked on this, I would not be taking 15 supplements, not declaring one of them, and not getting them batch tested because everything you stand for, and if you're saying you stand for all of those things like Iga is, then keeping yourself clean should be the most important thing to you because nothing else can derail your career in sport apart from doping or injury. And I think that's one of the big issues here is that if you don't take anything, you don't get done for this sort of stuff. And I think when will these people learn whether it is contaminated with integrity, as Simona Halep used that phrase, or whatever the case may be, you need to mitigate the risks and you can do things to do that. And one thing I will say finally on this topic that I'm not particularly pleased about from the WTA is that they did issue a statement regarding this and they acknowledged that this happened, but they did say before the paragraph that they included on Clean Sport, they did say that they fully support Iga during this difficult time. And they said how she's consistently demonstrated a strong commitment to fair play and upholding the principles of clean sport. And the unfortunate incident highlights the challenges athletes face in navigating the use of medications and supplements. Well, don't take them. And that is what the official guidance is on the onboarding to the tour and the training that you receive, is that if you take a supplement, you could be putting yourself at risk unless you are batch testing it. So they say don't take things. So for the WTA to say that,
For the WTA to get involved feels a bit, but like just stay on the sidelines. I
well,
think.
but where was this energy for other previous
Yeah,
cases? And I think that's something you have to draw comparisons with. And again, lots of players are not happy with this, but it does feel like there's a way that you can approach these sorts of things and not having something to test, taking the Jannik Sinner approach, obviously, and then getting it thrown out based on a storyline seems to have allowed active participation to continue. Whether there is a ban or a suspension that would happen, that will probably be the next time we jump on for one of these sort of doping weekly podcasts we seem to do, Joel, because
I know.
then we will find out if he will have to serve a ban. Will that affect, or suspension, sorry, will that have to affect his ranking, his defensive titles? But I do think that people do want to see consistency and transparency when it comes to these things.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point to end on. Listeners, let us know, what do you think of the Iga Swiatek case? We're going to be wrapping it up there, though. I hope you've enjoyed this little debate and we'll see you again soon.